You don't get any more top grade than a prediction if it turns out to be right. So I am going to show you why I make predictions, what is the predicted question that I'm giving you for Macbeth, then how to answer it, which quotes to use, in which order, and what you're going to say about them, and then the bonus bit. If you hang around, I'm going to show you how to apply everything I teach you if the exam mysteriously asks you a different question. I'm going to go through each question that can be asked. So, why do I make predictions? Number one, I have about a 50% success rate. I see that as extraordinary because it means that my students could get loads more marks if I predict every single question and 50% of those questions come up. That's why I make these videos. What you really want to know is, well, what is it for Macbeth? For Macbeth, the pattern I'm seeing is that it's likely to be on the supernatural. We have had the supernatural before in 2018, and therefore it might be more specifically focused on the witches and their influence on Macbeth. But really, whatever the wording, those two questions are pretty much the same. So, let's, as they say on YouTube, get into it. So, I'm going to start off with a thesis statement. The thesis statement gets me loads of marks because it tells the examiner I know what Shakespeare's purpose is. Okay, so here we go. Shakespeare's purpose is to flatter King James. King James is his patron. I don't have to go into all of that. He's going to flatter King James and his interest in witchcraft. That's why the witches appear in the play. But he's also exploring a really interesting idea of how much our lives are controlled by fate and how much are free will. So if we have free will, can we change our futures, our destiny, or is that already mapped out? You can see how that works with Macbeth's life. Would he have become king anyway, and would everything have worked out well if he hadn't acted on the witch's prophecies? So, that is my thesis. I have a bonus bit if you're up to this bit. If you're not, ditch it. And that is the patriarchal context of the time, because Shakespeare's exploring whether these women, who appear with beards, remember, resort to evil and witchcraft because there is no other way for such an unattractive woman to have any power in society at the time, because women's appearance was valued so highly. Thank God the world has changed. Number two, we're going straight in with the first lines of the play that introduce us to the witches, and so we've already said why they're there. They're there to flatter the king. In thunder, lightning, or in rain, they say. Now this gives us the possibility that they control the weather, and this sets them up as a true supernatural force. The next thing we find out about is that they are there to meet with Macbeth. So they can see into the future. They know that Macbeth will appear where they want him to appear. But there is another alternative interpretation here, that they just have the gift of foresight. This was quite common in Greek tragedy. Macbeth is a tragedy. All tragedies are descended from Greek tragedy. So, if they only have the gift of foresight, then Macbeth doesn't have to do anything. He can just wait for that future to arrive. But it also means they don't actually control him. They don't tell him what to do. They just leave it to his own evil, his own hamasha, to make him commit these sins to get what he wants, which is to be king. Number three, we're going to look at the actual prophecies, where they call him Cawdor, they tell him he's going to be king hereafter, and that reinforces the interpretation that they're basically just seeing into the future and they're not manipulating him by getting him to do anything. This is important because all the responsibility is his own. He can't ever say, "The witches made me do it. I was under the influence of Satan or the supernatural." He can't say that because they never make him do anything. And that's important to Shakespeare's worldview. He says we're all accountable for our actions because he's telling the nobles in the audience, you are accountable for your actions. Do not think about killing the king. Now I'm going to tell you the story about a guy called Macbeth who killed the king and look what happens to him, right? Whereas King James's worldview might be people become evil because Satan is working on them through the evil of other people. Different worldview, or you could argue that Shakespeare shares King James's worldview. Number 4, why do I yield that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair? You can see I must have been terrified a lot in my time. But Macbeth is saying, why? What does that mean? It means he's asking himself, what is it about me, Macbeth, that is causing me to think of murdering Duncan when I don't have to? The witches haven't said, oh, this fate will only come true if somebody gets rid of Duncan. No, they've said, during the course of time, Duncan will no longer be king, and you will be. And so Macbeth is suddenly thinking about murdering his king. And this troubles him because he realises there is something morally wrong with him. He realises that all this violence he's been using in support of his king, so he's become brave Macbeth, the noble warrior, the saviour of Scotland, all that heroism hides a darker problem. And this problem is a character flaw in himself, and that is what is called hamartia in Greek tragedy, and therefore in Macbeth. Next, he takes a step back in number 5 and he says, if chance may have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir. So this is a profound message because Shakespeare again is emphasising that every decision Macbeth makes is his own. He takes a step back and he says to himself, my fate is to become king. I don't have to stir, I don't have to do anything. But look at what he calls fate. This is Super Grade 9 analysis for you. He calls fate chance. Well, what does chance mean? It means random and lucky. And so by using the word chance and then repeating it, chance may crown me, he's emphasising to himself, all right, I know what you're saying to yourself, Macbeth, you could just wait, but the longer you wait, the more chance there is that this might not happen, because chance gives you an element of uncertainty. So his words mean fate, it is certain, but he uses words to persuade himself that it is not certain, that it is just chance. So you can see how his mind, and therefore his own words, are working against him, pushing him towards regicide. Number 6, and this is Banquo's intervention. Banquo was the ancestor of King James, and so Shakespeare gives Banquo moral certainty because he wants to say to King James, your ancestor was wonderful, which is why you are wonderful. And he's also saying to the nobles, look, King James, he's wonderful. Forget about the 1605 Catholic bomb plot to assassinate him. No, he's wonderful. Let's keep him as our glorious king. And by the way, if you don't, you're going to end up like Macbeth. So Banquo says, oftentimes, to win us to our harms, the instruments of darkness tell us truths. Why is this important? Firstly, he's saying to Macbeth, look, this sounds wonderful. Yes, the witches said you were going to become Thane of Cawdor, and look, hey presto, Ross and Angus or Lennox, I can't remember who they are, turn up and say, yes, you are Thane of Cawdor. Well, don't take that to heart. It could be that the witches are just giving you a little truth and then promising you the big truth of becoming king. So he might mean, look, you will never become king, or he might mean, yeah, you're going to become king, but let's just chill out and wait for it to happen. But there is a deeper psychology here, because when we think about the witch's influence on Macbeth, Shakespeare sets up Banquo as Macbeth's opposite. The technical terms for that is antithesis or foil. I tend to use the word antithesis and the Americans use the word foil. But it means the same thing. Shakespeare structures the play so that Macbeth is kind of the opposite to Banquo. Banquo is served up as morally good and Macbeth as morally evil. So Banquo's reaction is crucial because it says how we should react to evil, even evil that is seductive. We should take a step back and think, no, this seduction, this something that's evil, that sounds good and attractive, is going to lead me to my harm. I should therefore step back. So you could make the case that this would be the view of Shakespeare's Jacobean audience. However, it might not be the view of the specific audience in King James's palace who are watching the production of this play. Many of them would share the same ambition as Macbeth. Many of them would see that Queen Elizabeth died without an heir and would therefore want James to be replaced by somebody they thought was better and not Scottish. Now, calling the witches the instruments of darkness also gives us two possibilities. One, they are completely evil and dark, and therefore they express that evil. But two, they are being controlled. So there is a satanic figure, Satan for example, controlling the witches, who therefore control Macbeth. You can choose which interpretation you like, which worldview you think Shakespeare is putting forward. I'm going to argue later that Macbeth doesn't particularly believe in the evil satanic power of the witches. At number 7, we have the motive that the witches might have, which I introduced to you when I discussed the thesis statement. And so this is Banquo's reference saying, you should be women, and yet your beards forbid him for thinking they are so. Now, this is quite a sophisticated level of humour, and it's the humour that I'm going to use to suggest that Macbeth might not believe in the power of the witches, not the evil power. He still thinks they have a profound psychological power, and that power therefore might be used for evil purposes, but he doesn't believe they're in league with the devil. But you don't have to argue that, okay? But let's get to their motive either way, whether they're in league with the devil or not. Same motive. The motive is they've got beards. This is a patriarchal society in which they cannot get any power of their own except through marriage, and you either have to be born rich or born rich and attractive, born attractive or both, and the witches have neither. Here's the humour. As you probably know, all the female characters in Shakespeare's plays were played by men, but not grown men. If the woman was supposed to be feminine, they were played by young teenage boys, or even boys who weren't necessarily teenagers, because they would have no hair. This made them look female on stage, obviously not exactly, and that's part of the point. The audience knows that the woman is being played by a man. Well, Shakespeare could have had the witches portrayed by young teenage males, but he didn't. He deliberately went for fully grown men with fully grown beards. He didn't ask them even to shave. His whole point is, he's saying, look, it's masculine values, it's men that are the problem here, and that's why I'm casting fully grown men as the witches, to make the point that when women try to get power in different ways, it's because society doesn't give them any power. And that, you can see, would be an awesome link if the question turns out to be on Lady Macbeth. Same motive. Women who need to have power and influence, but society denies them. So, we have a motive for why they want to manipulate men. Why Macbeth? Well, because he's the most powerful man they can manipulate, and therefore by proxy, the most power they can achieve themselves. Next, we have Macbeth with his imaginary dagger. Some people like to ask themselves if this is produced by the supernatural. You know, maybe the witches have placed it there. But there's nothing in the stage directions to say that. So, and Shakespeare and Macbeth himself calls it a dagger of the mind. So Shakespeare gives Macbeth this self-knowledge. Macbeth knows that he is destroying his own sanity by going to kill Duncan, and yet his desires are so powerful he's going to do it anyway. He also realises that there is no real dagger. It's just a projection of the power of his own desires. So when we're considering how much the witches influence him, we're coming down really firmly on the side that it's Macbeth's own desires that are doing the job. At the end of the dagger, he then sees gouts of blood, which again emphasise his bloodlust, how much he enjoys killing and how much he wants to kill the king to get what he wants, which is obviously absolute power and kingship. You can add on to that Mr. Everything English's favourite quote, "The heat oppressed brain." What is causing the heat in Macbeth's brain? Is it the witch's words or is it his own desires? I'm going for it's the power of his own desires, which are so fierce that they produce their own heat. If, however, you want to show that the witches are satanic, then the heat, you could say, alludes to the fires of hell, and therefore, in thinking about murdering Duncan, Macbeth is stepping into this hellish world, and so the heat is turned up. Number 9. This, I think, is Macbeth's actual downfall. You don't have to take this interpretation, you don't have to take any of my interpretations, but it'll give you stuff to argue about in the exam. And so here, he says, "Thou canst not say I did it." Who's he saying it to? He's saying it to Banquo's ghost. Now again, you could argue that the witches, through their supernatural power, are causing Banquo's ghost to appear. I don't favour that view. I'm saying no, it's Macbeth's own mind that is producing this spectre, this ghost of Banquo. Or, I also really love this interpretation, it is fate. So, when Macbeth killed Duncan, he then went against Lady Macbeth's plans and killed his grooms. They weren't supposed to do that. This made Macduff suspicious, but it didn't lead to anybody challenging him. And they crowned him as king. So he got away with killing Duncan. Fate said, "You're going to become king." So that is in the prophecy. Fate, call that God or some mysterious power that decides our destiny. Fate is happy. But the prophecy was next that Banquo's sons would become kings, a line of kings. Macbeth won't accept that, and so he has Banquo murdered. When he does that, he is challenging fate. He's trying to change destiny. And at that point, you could argue, fate intervenes. Fate you could have as the witches or as God. God could be saying, look, this is my plan. And so the plan is that Banquo's sons will become king. As soon as that doesn't happen, what does Macbeth do? He confesses to all the nobles, to all the most powerful people in Scotland, that he has killed Duncan. Why is that a confession? Well, because none of them know that Banquo's dead. The big news is that the king was assassinated, and now, never shake thy gory locks at me, Macbeth is focusing, as far as they can tell, on the blood spilt on the murdered Duncan. So this now becomes a confession, and now various nobles decide to turn against him and to join Malcolm in England. This is the moment where everything goes wrong, not when he decided to murder Duncan. Now, number 10. When we think about the continuing power of the witches, we see that they never go to meet with Macbeth again. This questions their evil nature, doesn't it? They haven't sought Macbeth out. They haven't tried to manipulate him further once he's killed Duncan. Instead, it's Macbeth who goes to see the witches. Now, another thing that shows that they're not that powerful is that they don't tell him what to do again. Let's unpick that. He goes to see them because he says, I am bent to know by the worst means the worst. In other words, he already knows that the worst is coming. Like he knows it's coming. And he's saying, look, I'm going to do something I shouldn't do. I'm going to go and see the witches again. That's the worst thing I can do. But I'm just going to find out what the worst thing is in the future. He's not asking them for advice, and they don't give him orders. Before we look at the riddles that they present him with, let's consider what they say when he arrives. They've just done a spell. It's probably for Macbeth, but we don't know. But the first witch says, by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. In other words, they have picked on Macbeth, not just because he is this powerful male, but because he is wicked. They have recognised the evil in Macbeth that so surprised him when he said, why do I yield to this suggestion? So they have seen that in him before he has. That's a completely different perspective, of course, from Lady Macbeth, who thought he was full of the milk of human kindness. How wrong was she? The witches, they were entirely right. And so the wicked Macbeth now comes to see the witches, and they are now going to play with him. The idea of talking to the tragic hero in riddles comes directly from Greek tragedy. So what would happen in a Greek tragedy is that the hero would try to escape their fate, and they'd go to the oracle, so this seer into the future, and she would say what was coming. She wouldn't make it easy for them. She would present information as a riddle, and then when things eventually happened, the hero would go, oh, so that's what the flipping riddle meant. Damn, if only I'd worked it out earlier. This game is still being played with Macbeth, but Shakespeare is therefore treating the three witches as like the three fates in Greek tragedy. He's therefore suggesting that they aren't satanic. They are just instruments of fate rather than instruments of darkness. In Greek tragedy, the terrible things that happen to the hero are because of his own hamartia, his own fatal flaw, and it's the same with Macbeth. Macbeth doesn't just want to be king, he wants to keep on killing, he wants more and more. You can characterise that as ambition, that's the common way of looking at it, or you can characterise it as bloodlust, that's the way I look at it. You can choose which one you want, it doesn't matter as long as you back it up. So, what is the prophecy that most matters to Macbeth? It's the riddle they give him when they say, none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. Now this is like a major con, because even when we find out that Macduff wasn't born of a woman, it's actually a lie. He was born of a woman, it was his mother. You can't claim that therefore she is dead and not a woman anymore. And so the witches are toying with Macbeth here. They're presenting something which sounds impossible and then is impossible, and then they've got like a kind of 80% match when Macduff turns around and says, "Aha! I was from my mother's womb untimely ripped." Shouldn't be that cheerful really, because his mum died, but you get what I'm saying here. They're stretching the truth. They're playing. They're not making Macbeth do anything different to what he would already have done. At this stage, Macbeth knows that Malcolm and the English army are coming. He knows that his own nobles have started to desert and go and join the English. He knows that he's not going to win this battle, but he just wants to find out, like, when am I going to lose? How am I going to die? He wants to know by the worst means the worst. So they're not actually getting him to change his behaviour in any way. They're just playing with him. Now, you could argue that when they say, "Beware Macduff," they're encouraging him to kill Macduff, but actually it's too late. Macduff has already gone. So when Macbeth chooses to kill Macduff's family, that's nothing to do with the witches. In fact, you could say that if he followed the witches' advice, he should never have killed Macduff's family, because that would give Macduff even more of a motive to kill him. So if he had listened to the witches, he wouldn't have killed Macduff's family. Macduff might not have killed him. So again, the witches here are not portrayed as evil. They are not getting him to act in ways that are against his interests. They are simply manipulating his hopes in order to give him greater despair if he chooses to think there's still some chance of survival and victory. Now, the massive change from Macbeth is actually the death of Lady Macbeth. I like to argue that his reaction, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and all that soliloquy, proves how much he loved her, and his reaction then, when he kind of gives up on life and becomes nihilistic, thinking that life is meaningless, that's what nihilistic means, shows how much a part of his life Lady Macbeth was. Once she's dead, his life no longer has any meaning. You could even argue that his desire to become king is really to elevate his wife to queen, and his reasons for killing Banquo and Banquo's children isn't to protect his own life, it's to ensure that Lady Macbeth and him are going to have children who will also become kings. That to satisfy his wife. You don't have to argue that at all, of course, but that's just where I like to go with it. So, in this tomorrow and tomorrow soliloquy, I'm not going to quote the whole thing for you, but I'm going to concentrate on a few key words. So he sees himself and life as a poor player, a walking shadow that struts his hour upon the stage. So the idea here is that he sees life as meaningless, and that the person living it, himself, is like an actor in a play. What sort of actor is he? He is a poor player. Player was an actor. He's no good. And so he's thinking, my whole life has been pointless, even becoming king was pointless. But the next thing he's thinking is that he is a walking shadow. So a shadow is something that you can never catch. And so he's always after the next big thing, but he can never get it. But a shadow is also insubstantial. So kingship might be the real person, but he just inhabits the shadow part. So he's not a real king because he's gone against God, he's gone against the divine right of kings, he's gone against the great chain of being. But this would have meant even more to a Jacobean audience. The shadow was the name for the understudy. So the understudy goes on when the main actor is ill or away for some reason. So not as good an actor. So what he's saying is he's been a kind of imposter all this time. He's not even just a bad actor. He's so bad that he doesn't even get to play the part himself. He's playing someone else's part. You can see how that goes back to Why Do You Dress Me in Borrowed Robes? That he's taking the place of Duncan, but he actually doesn't fit the role of king. He is a bad fit, a bad actor, an imposter. Now he has realised that. He's realised that his whole life and ambition has been for nothing. But the next part of the quote is that he is playing a tale told by an idiot. So on one level, he's accusing himself of being that idiot. But if we develop that extended metaphor, who has written the script in which he is the actor playing the part? Is it the witches who have determined how he's going to behave, or is it in fact God? I think he's blaming God here. He's saying, look, you've decided what my fate is going to be. It's completely pointless. It's completely meaningless. This is important in two ways. Number one, it confirms that he's an awful human being to a Jacobean audience because he's criticising God. Number two, he's also denying his own personal responsibility. He's saying, look, it wasn't really me that made all those decisions to kill people when I didn't need to. It was in fact God. God made me do it. It was my fate. It was a script written by an idiot. So, quite an accusation to turn against God, and that shows us quite how much he is in despair that everything has turned to ashes. There is no value in his life. But the crucial bit for me, because this is about the witches, is that he doesn't blame them. He beats himself up for believing them, but he never says, they made me do it. So in believing them, he's cursing himself for indulging in hope, and now he's realised that there is no hope. Now that's completely different from looking back at his life and saying, oh, it would all have been different if the witches hadn't persuaded me to kill the king, or to kill Banquo, or to kill Macduff's family. None of that ever happened. Now, at the end, he still believes in the witches' prophecies. He can see that they can see his fate, they can see the future. And that's why he says, what's he that was not born of woman? Such a one am I to fear. So he actually goes looking for his own death. He wants to find this person who wasn't born a woman. He wants to solve the riddle. Like, I can't solve it, it's impossible. Everyone was born of a woman. I need the answer. Okay, the answer is going to lead to my death, but I'm going to die anyway, let's be fair, so I just want to know. Now, I find that almost charming, and it shows the power of fate and the power of tragedy. He just wants to know the ending. We're all like that, aren't we? We want to get to the end of the story. If you're reading a story and someone takes away the last 3 pages, you're like, what? I've wasted my whole time with this book. There's no 3 pages. That's how he views his life. The ending is so important, and he wants to find out. What does it all mean? Does it all mean nothing? Is it all a tale told by an idiot? The other part of the quote, I have forgot the taste of fears, is brilliant. He, as king, no longer feels afraid, and he's missing those feelings. He doesn't feel anything now, and he wants to get back in touch with his feelings again. Did the witches give him this state where he no longer has fear? I don't think they did. It was his own actions. The witches have not made him afraid in any way. Even at the beginning, what was he afraid of? Not the witches, but his own thoughts, his own desires. So now we come to the conclusion, where we're going to say this is a cautionary tale, warning the nobles not to turn to evil, that's where the witches come in, not to be tempted, that's where the witches come in, not to try and achieve power that they don't deserve, that's where the witches' prophecies come in, not to listen to evil influences, that's where the Catholic plotters come in, but instead to accept the great chain of being and the divine right of kings. And in this part of my conclusion, I'm going to argue that the most important thing in the play is not the influence of the witches, it's the internal psychology and desires of Macbeth's own mind. A mind that he's encouraging the audience not to fall into. So I've shown you how to get full marks in this question. Let's think about what happens if you get a question on something else. So let's say it's a question on Macbeth himself. How much of this would you use? Well, you're going to talk about him being evil, and that's why the witches have targeted him. You're going to talk about how they only tell him the truth, but he still has this thought of murdering the king immediately, and so we talk about his ambition, his inherent evil. You're then going to talk about his character, where he persuades himself that he can't just wait for a fate, he's going to have to intervene in case fate is not certain and it's just chance. You will talk about how he understands what morally upright behaviour should be, and he understands that he shouldn't go and kill the king, but he also understands that he's going to become king anyway. That's the point of Banquo's words, but he's going to go against it in his own mind and then in his actions. This puts all the responsibility on him. And so you can see how all this would lead to an essay on Macbeth. So what if the essay is about violence? Well, we can talk about Macbeth's violence. You'd always go to the beginning of the play, the unseen him from the nave to the chops. I say a lot about that in other videos. But then you will say, right, that's why they've chosen him. They've seen his violent capabilities, and therefore the witches understand that when they influence Macbeth, he's likely to react violently, as he does. We're going to number 4 again. Why do I yield to that suggestion? We then have him equivocating about, well, I can just wait for fate to happen, but he rejects that, not because of his ambition, if it's a violent question, but because he is addicted to violence and bloodlust. And so you can see how this would be images of violence. Why does he see a dagger of the mind with blood on it? Because he's addicted to violence, and so on. You just take these and think, right, what can I say about violence? Sometimes you'll have to add in something else, like I did at the beginning, with unseamed him from the nave to the chops. Everyone's paranoid. The question might be about kingship. Well, okay, so what is a good king? Well, it's not Duncan, because he keeps not seeing who the traitors are. He doesn't spot that the Thane of Cawdor, the original one, was a traitor. He doesn't spot that MacDonald was obviously a traitor and has gone to fight for the Norwegians. And he doesn't spot that the new Thane of Cawdor, Macbeth, is also a traitor. And so, he is not a good political operator. Yet he's a really bad judge of human character, and therefore we can argue that he is not a decent king. A strong king won't suffer from other rulers thinking they can invade. A strong king will appear too powerful, too organised, have all his nobles on his side. So, Shakespeare's arguing, Duncan, not a very good king, pal. And that's maybe why fate has decided to get rid of him. Then we talk about Macbeth. Good king, in the sense that he's very strong, he knows how to get his own way, and he knows how to keep Banquo quiet. You could argue that that's a strong king, if you wanted, or you could argue that it's obviously a terrible king because he's gone against the chain of being and killed the king, gone against God. But what goes wrong for him is that he then keeps killing his allies, his nobles. And that's what a king had to do, had to keep their nobles on side. Macbeth fails to do that. That's what makes him a terrible king. So Shakespeare could be arguing two ways. A good king is somebody who is morally good on the side of God, or a good king could be a kind of Machiavellian version who is powerful, is brutal, but keeps all his allies on side. You can choose whichever one you want. Now we can go through and look at this and think, well, what bits of these show what kind of king he is? He rejects waiting. He's a man of action. That's possibly a good characteristic in a king. It's just that he chooses the wrong actions because he's attracted to evil by turning against his own nobles. A good king has a clear head. Macbeth cannot be a good king because his head is no longer clear, because he's given up his own sanity by committing himself to evil and going against God. Who should advise a king? His trusted nobles. Macbeth doesn't seem to have any of those. He talks to his wife occasionally, but he never has a conversation with another noble in order to get political advice. Instead, he goes to the witches. Bad king, wrong advisors. Then we get to the ending, where we get the natural order restoring itself, with Malcolm being presented as a king. This is the image of what kingship should be, not just a good person, but the one appointed by God, a direct descendant of Duncan, which of course leads us to the royal line. King James, he's a good king. That is the message that Shakespeare is giving, and therefore you should support him, nobles. You shouldn't make him try to reach out to you, but by the way, he is reaching out to you because you're all here in the audience watching my amazing play. What if the question is about Lady Macbeth? Well, we can look at whether we think she is inherently evil, the fourth witch idea, or whether she is exploited by a patriarchal society and therefore made evil by her lack of power because of her role. Let's dive in and see how this would fit. The witches pick on Macbeth to meet, not Lady Macbeth, which is interesting because one view is that Lady Macbeth is the person who persuades Macbeth to kill. So why don't the witches appear to both of them, or just to Lady Macbeth? Because ultimately they know that she is not evil enough, whereas Macbeth is. She says, "Put all this night's great business in my dispatch." In other words, I'm going to kill the king. You just have to agree to it, Macbeth. But then she says, he looked too much like my father as he slept. So she thinks that she can be cruel enough, but the moment she sees Duncan, she can't do it because it reminds her of who? Her father. What does the father symbolise? The patriarchy. Because the word patriarchy comes from the Latin pater, which is father. So because she can't go against her father, because she's been brought up as a woman in a patriarchal society, she can't even symbolically go against her father by killing the king. And father, of course, is also what God was called, and indeed still is, our Father who art in heaven. So you can see how deep the patriarchal influence is that stops Lady Macbeth acting on her desires. So that's a reason why the witches go to Macbeth. He has the power to act rather than Lady Macbeth, who doesn't. Then we get the witches' prophecies. Well, we can jump from that to the letter that Macbeth writes to his wife, calling her my dearest partner in greatness. And so here we have something that is unexpected in this patriarchal society. Women were deeply subservient to men. In fact, they were their property at this stage. And yet Macbeth treats her as a partner in greatness, and he talks about the greatness that is promised thee. Now, we could go a step further. It's not just that he loves her and therefore treats her in this way as an equal. It's also that he knows he hasn't got the ambition to kill the king, or rather, he's got the ambition, but that's not enough. He calls it vaulting ambition that falls on the other. He knows that he's going to jump to become king, but he'll fall if he doesn't have more than just ambition. What's more? Lady Macbeth, the planner, the persuader, the one who's going to work out how they get away with it. So that's how he uses the prophecies to write her a letter, because he knows she will start thinking about a plan before he then arrives. He's cunning, is Macbeth. He's Machiavellian. He's exploiting his wife. You could then talk about how that leads to a comparison where she thinks she's going to pour her spirits in his ear and manipulate him because he's too full of the milk of human kindness, which we've already established is completely and utterly wrong. Something wicked this way comes, we had later, where the witches perceive that, and obviously he's killed the king, and then he goes on a spree of killing. There's definitely no milk in that bottle. Why do I yield to that suggestion? Macbeth immediately thinks of murder. So does Lady Macbeth. So now we can say that they are so well suited, the ultimate power couple who can get everything they want because they're willing to stop at nothing to achieve it. You could even say that things start to go wrong when Macbeth stops confiding in his wife. Because remember, it all goes wrong here. Thou canst not say I did it. When he's killed Banquo, does he discuss the killing of Banquo with his wife? No, he doesn't. He says, be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck. He doesn't tell her what he's going to do. Now, she also does want him to kill Banquo, so you can play that either way. So either their plans fail because they are both flawed, or they fail because Macbeth doesn't turn to his wife's advice. You decide which way you want to go there. When he says, thou canst not say I did it, she's the first person to realise what this means to the nobles, and she is quick-witted enough to think of the excuses. Oh, my lord is often thus, he's suffering from this fit. You don't have to get the exact quotation, by the way, you can paraphrase. It's something he's had since his youth, and so she thinks on her feet all the time to try and bail him out of the holes he's dug himself. But here she can't, because that confession cannot be covered up. Now, when he goes to see the witches to find out what the worst is, we can see this as a rejection of his wife. He doesn't want her advice anymore. We will have to get Lady Macbeth's most famous bit, the sleepwalking scene. He still loves her, which is why he's got the doctor to come and help her. Wouldn't any husband do that? Well, what's going on? He is getting his armour on, ready to fight a war. So it's like, you know, I'm going to fight this battle against the whole of England, or I'm going to take time out to see if I can get help for my wife. He feels bad for her madness. He realises what's wrong, that she's feeling terrible regret about what Macbeth has done, not just what she's done. And that's why in her speech she talks about the Thane of Fife had a wife. She's looking at her husband and thinking, I don't know him anymore. He is now just become a voracious murderer. That's not the man I married. You could also see her as reflecting on her role as a woman here. The wife has been killed. Nothing is sacred. The other role that a wife has, particularly for Macbeth, is to provide an heir. That's why Macbeth is out killing Banquo's heirs, because he hasn't got one yet who is going to become king. Lady Macbeth, you will remember, is talking about come to my woman's breasts, so the murdering ministers can take the milk from her breast and turn it into bitterest gall. So she's still lactating, which means she's only recently lost a child. And now that gives her a motive for wanting to become great in another way. I can't achieve greatness by being the Jacobean ideal of a wife, so therefore I'm going to try and achieve greatness by becoming a queen. At the end of the play, she suffers obviously from guilt and madness, but also she's looking at her patriarchal role and realising that she cannot fulfil it. She's a terrible queen because she's married to a terrible king. She's a terrible wife because she hasn't had any children to produce an heir. She's also sleeping separately from her husband, who has stopped confiding in her, so she is no longer a partner of greatness. She's simply got greatness, but she's lost the partner bit. How do we know? Because he goes to the witches instead of going to her for advice. And then our conclusion is still the same. She is the fiend-like queen. It's a cautionary tale. Evil is to be rejected. Divine right of kings is to be restored. Yada, yada, yada. So if you would like a grade 8 and a grade 9 essay for this question, it is in the link below the video. Let's get those grades.